a lot of our oral traditions, we also have this idea of being given this sovereignty. I equated in my Ojibwe family and my Arikara family to our original instructions that we received from the Creator. And in those original instructions, we were given ideas about governance, about how to engage with the animal and plant nations, how to engage with other humans in our space, and what it looked like. So when we talk about natural sovereignty, this is just the ability of people to gather and to do what's right for the collective, right? And so when we think back through our traditional expressions of sovereignty and the original instructions that we received, it created opportunities for our nations to engage with each other, and not just nations of people or tribal nations, but with the Hukos, so the Bison Nation, or with the Plant Nation, the Corn Nation. And we entered into agreements with them, right? When the Arikaras had a ceremony and a relationship building exercise that we went through with the bison when they would come into our area of the plains every year. And we kept this area in a way that would attract them to come back. That was us holding up our end of the bargain. And for us keeping those grounds in a way that were beneficial to the Bison Nation, the bison would let us collect some of their citizens so that we could live on as people. And so those are examples of the kinds of sovereign moves that happen inherently when we're out in the world. And I think for our ability to go forward as tribal people, we have to start thinking more about our inherent tribal sovereignty, our inherent sovereignty as nations, rather than looking to the outside to validate who we are as nations.
So I differentiate between tribal sovereignty and inherent sovereignty. And as tribes and people, we have inherent sovereignty by way of being. Sovereignty refers to the power over your people and your territory. But tribal sovereignty is a legal fiction. It was something developed through the Supreme Court, and it's based on the doctrine of discovery, which came out of the Vatican and waged a war on all non-Christian people in the world. That's based on racism. And it's also based on federal paternalism, plenary power, congressional authority. Tribal sovereignty is limited, and the way that it's defined is limited, and the way that it's attacked often are efforts to limit it further. And so with that limited sovereignty, there's lots of different terms, domestic dependent nations, semi-sovereignty. Often when I try to explain it to my students, I talk about internal sovereign powers and external sovereign powers. And external sovereign powers would be your relationships with other sovereign entities, signing treaties, doing a trade agreement, waging war. Internal sovereign powers would look at things internally over your land and your people, like taxation. So when the government defines tribal sovereignty, it takes away, in an oversimplified term, those external powers. It didn't when it made treaties with us. It recognized those. But when it violated those treaties, it said we only had internal sovereignty. So it's important to think about it in terms of legal fiction, because that's what it is. It was something developed over time to justify the taking of land and resources.
For us, we're a small government. We're a small government, and we're a young government in terms of the American-defined sovereign nation. As far as the historical part of being Havasupai and being a sovereign nation, we know inherently what our sovereign rights are. We were told that at a younger age. We didn't have to go read it in a textbook. We didn't have to be given it in a law that says, oh, here, Havasupai, now all of a sudden you're a tribal council. Another example that we did was changed our constitution. We no longer have to answer to the BIA. I have to say this. I think this was so ridiculous when the BIA said that in the 1934 IRA constitutions. They literally came to the tribes and gave her tribe a template, my tribe a template, and these tribes templates. Just change the name, just change the tribe. This is who you are, this is how you're gonna run, you're gonna have elected officials, you're gonna have a constitution, here you go. We had to figure that out on how to change those rules, and one of the rules that we changed was no new or any uranium mining on the Havasupai Reservation. I think we're one of the few tribes that really put that in there so that our future generations would not be able to mine on our property, on our lands. A lot of these original territories are sacred places, are ancient trails, are burial sites, are all now under the control of the Kaibab Forest Service. And that's why they're allowing these international mining companies to come in and stake claims. So what we've done as a tribe is go back there physically and occupy our sacred places in a good way. And it's not a protest, it's us going back to our original territories and paying homage to our sacred places. You know, and that needs to continue within our tribes and our communities. Don't, just because they're on Forest Service land does not mean you don't go there. You go there. You're walking sovereignty onto your sacred site. Do what you need to do. You know, don't let them push you off. So there's so many things that tribes can do to flex their muscles, but for me and my Havasupai people, we're going back and documenting all the burial sites, all the sacred places, all the sweat lodge areas to prove to the fact that we are not gone, we're still here, and there's always been that historical connection. You know, and that really needs to continue amongst all tribes.
I am working with my tribe now, taking a look at our constitution, taking a look at rights of nature, and I'm very interested in our tribe establishing environmental laws, incorporating them into our constitution, things that we want protected in perpetuity. We surveyed our community there on the reservation. It was a 4-month extensive survey process where we talked to elders. We filled out forms asking everybody, you know, what they wanted protected in perpetuity. And it was all the things that you might expect. It was our pristine aquifer that's under the reservation. It was the Colorado River. Our reservation sits along the Colorado River as well. It was our resident animals, it was our fauna, it was our sacred sites. And again, none of that is in our constitution today. My hope is that our tribe can flex our sovereignty, change our constitution, and protect those things in perpetuity.
I think for me, you know, those are the emphasis that I would put on what comes next when we flex sovereignty is this idea of codifying opportunity, creating systems of support. You know, to get more specific, I'd love to see us do something with citizenship that makes a lot more sense to our traditional values as Native peoples. Blood quantum is a divisive tool, and if we continue to go down that path, we will all delude ourselves into nothing. And so I don't agree with it one bit. Constitutional reform, projecting IRA structures, going back to traditional systems and clanships, looking to our grandmothers again and giving that voice back to the women in our communities that's been robbed from us. All of my nations come from matrilineal societies. And yet I have never existed having a female tribal chair in my nation. It's insane to me.
My kind of pessimism, I think, when it comes to sovereignty, it actually comes from termination. So it happened later than the 1934 constitutions, but in the 1950s, our tribe was terminated. And my dad tells me this story. He often jokes a little bit when he tells the story. He said that the BIA came in and they had pictures of modern kitchens and houses with white picket fences and all of these things that were going to improve life on the reservation. And they said, you know, sign here, and you know, the language that they use for termination, that you would be free from the burdens of being a tribe, that you would be just like all other Americans. And so thinking about that period and about what people were going through, our tribe signed on the dotted line and agreed to termination, and that ended our sovereignty. We were no longer sovereign. We were no longer a tribe. Our recognition was restored in the 1980s, and my grandmother was the lead plaintiff on a class action lawsuit that restored our tribe and 16 others. And that was based on the fact that the government didn't make good on the promises that they offered to us for termination. But my dad says this, he said, and this is where he was joking, he said he ran out of the meeting after they signed on termination, and he looked in the mirror and he still saw an Indian. And, he was, making the point that, were we supposed to become white? Were we supposed to now become part of the fabric of American society? And that wasn't the case. And so, we have to think about sovereignty as fragile, and that, we feel strong today with economies and governments, but we did live through a time when it was taken away. I kind of go back to thinking about sovereignty of the individual and sovereignty of the family. And I think that's really critical, especially for tribes in California. It's very critical to me that the youth in our community have connection to their culture, have access to education and learning, and are able to be fulfilled as they develop their tribal identities. And that's real independence. That's sovereignty that can't be taken away, no matter what. I had a youth come in the museum recently, and she was filling out a form to join the tribal ambassadors, and it said tribal affiliation. And she raised her hand and she asked me, what do I put here? Our family was disenrolled. Can I still put that I'm Pomo? And I said, absolutely. No one's going to take that from you. And so, when we talk about sovereignty and the shield and the sword, there's sometimes as tribes that use sovereignty as a sword. And it's because we're not whole people. We have a lot of healing to do. We have a lot to work on when it comes to historical trauma. Genocide was not that long ago for us. And so I just want to see young kids focus on the future, and so as whole healthy people, that when they practice sovereignty, they do it in a way that's fair and just and forward thinking.